Welcome to The Patient Physician, a space for doctors to explore their physical, mental, and financial wellness. Your peers and industry leaders will destigmatize institutional perceptions while redefining success, money, and personal care. Get ready to pull back the curtain, because here, you are both patient and physician.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Patient Physician. I am your host, Paul Smith.
And I am your co-host, Chris Fulbright, and we are excited to welcome Dr. Lexie Wang onto the show.
Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Wang. How are you today?
I'm good. It was a little bit busy at the office, but I made it.
Well, I have to say, for those listening, we had a quick laugh right before this because, we try to get the settings right and get our environments right so that we can have a good conversation. And you have a visitor that keeps poking his head in, so that's already been fun for us.
Yes.
So let me jump off here. I want to thank you for your time. I know how busy that you can be, and so we always want to start by saying thank you. I'm going to share a quick bio, and then we'll jump right in. Today, we're visiting with Dr. Lexie Wang. She is a board-certified surgeon specializing in facial plastic surgery, located in Washington, D.C. She grew up in the Northern Virginian suburbs of D.C., and just before going off to college, she was diagnosed with a sudden illness that required hospitalization. And this is what drove her passion and pursuit for medicine. She then went on to graduate from UC San Diego in 3 years and took a year off to do full-time research in labs studying circadian rhythms, and then continued her education at University of Virginia Medical School. She completed her 5-year residency in otolaryngology at Virginia and Commonwealth University, and then a final year in fellowship studying facial plastic and reconstructive surgery in Beverly Hills with Dr. Paul Nassif and Dr. Babak Azizadeh. Then returning to DC to join West End Plastic Surgery, where she focused on delivering comprehensive and customized facial rejuvenation. Thanks again for your time. And I wanted to have you on our show because you share a very interesting story, and your path into medicine is one that I thought that our listeners would be not only interested in, but then also the reasons why you continue to pursue it. So can you just jump in and kind of tell us a bit more about that path? Because when we talked to you previously, this was not originally your first choice to become a physician.
Yeah, you are correct. So people who knew me in high school all knew that I was dead set on becoming a lawyer or some kind of politician growing up in the DC area. That was kind of what was the thing to do. And I was in debate team and Model UN and was all set to do that until I just had this random illness. In my senior year of high school, it came out of the blue. No one in my family has it, but it was severe enough that I did end up having to take time off from school, and I was hospitalized and all that. And, I still very distinctly remember there was a moment when I was in this dialysis chair, and I remember thinking, wow, I can't believe medicine is so powerful enough that it can either decide that I am not going to make it, or it can allow me to have kind of like a second chance at life. And that was the first time I started realizing that it was more than just biology and studying medications and things like that, but it could actually do something that I honestly don't think any other profession can do. So after that, I was kind of pretty set on becoming a doctor. It carried me through all the hard times in training, medical school, et cetera. Anytime I was too tired or feeling a little bit burnt out, I kind of always remembered I could easily be that person in that chair again, were it not for this field. And I'm going to try my absolute best to give back to the field as much as I got from it.
I just think that's a big reason for a lot of the choices that are made to go down the route of becoming a physician. There is just so much that is given towards that path, as you mentioned. The hard times, I want to talk about that a little bit later because you're also a pretty big advocate of mental health and wellness, and really being more vocal about that. But we hear that often, right? Getting through the tough times, having that motivation. And I do love that you had that change. I don't know that we had originally talked. What was your field of law going to be? Did you have a choice at that point, or?
Yeah, that's a funny thing. At the time, I was really into constitutional law, which I understand is a very niche type of field. But I don't know. I really like to read Supreme Court briefs, so that was very strange.
Wait, you really like to read
Yeah,
Supreme Court
I
briefs?
know. I know.
This is not something like you grab a glass of wine and do on a Friday night. I don't think, right?
No,
Or
I
maybe
was
it is.
very strange. I actually, for a period, would just take like practice LSAT questions just for fun, just to test if I could still do it. And I've moved on from that, but it was something I did for a while.
You've just gotten started because you're not very far into your career. You've just gotten started and returned back
Yes.
to the DC area. I wonder if you ever consider, after you've had a stint of medicine, if you ever go back into the legal field in some facet that ties back to medicine, or maybe the administration of medicine, or maybe it's advocating for physician wellness and health.
Yeah, I am obviously a young doctor just finishing all of my training. So who knows what the future is going to hold. I know that my parents, who kind of saw me through this change, have always said, well, you could always try to marry the two and see what happens. So we'll see.
That is a big change. You hadn't had anything going on prior in your health, and then this unforeseen health triggers the change. You find an appreciation for the medical field, and then you didn't necessarily go the route of what maybe would help you specialize in the very issue that you were hospitalized for. But then you chose to go the route of otolaryngology and then ultimately into facial plastics. Can you walk us a little bit through what that was about and your motivation for choosing your specific path and specialty?
Yeah, so actually, that was probably the number one question I got from my peers and other colleagues, was why I chose not to go into nephrology, which was associated with the illness I had. I will say, I think to this day, there's a little bit of PTSD still. So that definitely played a role, in that there were a couple of times on the hospital wards where I might run into someone who had something very similar to what I had. And it kind of hit a little bit too close to home that I don't think I could have based my entire practice around that. But one thing I definitely connected with when I was really sick was this strange phenomenon where I think it's starting to become more obvious now in medicine, but that when I was growing up, it was all about you're sick and then you take a medication and then you're cured. And I learned from my condition that we don't talk about the C word of cure. We talk about going into control and remission, and that perhaps it might never be cured. And I remember being very frustrated by the thought of that because I wanted to be cured. And during that time period, I actually found that I connected a lot with some of my friends who had cancer, because they kind of go through a very similar situation where, the cancer might always come back, just might always come back. And so with that, I kind of thought that I was going to do some kind of cancer type of medicine, because it allowed me to have that kind of understanding of the disease and what the patients are going through, but it wasn't exactly what I went through, if you know what I mean. And then in terms of the kinds of cancers, it just kind of fell into my lap, that I ended up in head and neck cancer. I chose to do a research project or internship that summer between my first and second year of medical school. I was in the radiation oncology department. So they're the people who do external and internal radiation for cancer treatment. And I just happened to be assigned to a head and neck cancer project. And so I kind of wound up there and then fell in love with the field. That's how I picked it as my specialty. And then in terms of going from there into facial plastics, it was a little bit even more nuanced of this whole appreciation for what medicine or what my training could do in terms of delivering back certain elements of what enhances someone's quality of life. It was something where I used to kind of get very angsty over when I was recovering from my illness, because a lot of people would say, well, don't you feel happy? You're better. You aren't in the hospital anymore. And I'm like, no, I don't, because I still can't eat normally. I still can't participate in the activities I used to be able to. These are the things that is what makes up a human. And it was really hard to kind of explain that. And so I think, again, through that whole process, I realized that there's a lot more to making someone who they are other than their physical body and their makeup. There's also how they feel on the inside and what they can project on the outside. And so that's kind of how I found my way into facial plastics.
So tell me a little bit about that, the connection of how they feel, because this is very interesting. When we were talking previously, the connection between the internal satisfaction and the external appearance and how somebody views themselves, that's really where you kind of came in. And we visited about how you have to really talk to patients and counsel them through that. So as I understood, it was your path because you wanted to help people feel better about that, but through the quality of life, right? So how have you seen that that's impacting patients? Can you speak to that a little bit and how they feel?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's something I deal with pretty much every day now in my current job and throughout my training. But
Right.
I would say on the good side, and what we're hoping to do is you get the patient who, is a little bit self-conscious about something of themselves, and they have the ability and the means to do so, to maybe make this modification, and we do it, and then they come in beaming. They're a completely different person. They're confident. They're dressing differently. They, feel like they can go out and date or whatever it might be. And those are obviously kind of the best transformative moments. And that would be the ideal scenario. That's, of course, I think what all of the plastic surgeons are kind of looking for. Of course, we also get the other end of the spectrum where you get patients who perhaps fixate a little too much on how they appear externally and don't have some of that internal validation, that they think that, doing this plastic surgery will be the determining factor for why they have a job, or, their family will love them again. All these kind of deep traumas that come up. And so it's very important for me as the surgeon to kind of figure out who are the people who are doing it for the right reasons, and then who are the people who are not doing it for the right reasons, and how to guide them in terms of what are their next steps.
Yeah, I think you have an interesting field in that perspective, in that you're helping people feel better internally, potentially for themselves, but whereas a lot of medicine is dedicated to just helping people feel better, like to get better, not to just feel better. But then now you're adding in that element of the psychology of it. So have you had that where you feel like somebody's trying to solve something from the outside perspective that they really need to address from the inside first?
Yes, I've had a couple. Without going into like significant detail, I will say that some of the ones that come to my mind immediately, I have a patient who got a scar from, some other incident, basically. And they came to me and, asked, how did the scar look? It was still pretty fresh. And I said it looked fine. I wouldn't have changed anything differently about it. But they continue to come see me because they feel that the scar is the reason why they got a divorce and why they have not been able to find a significant other. And I have to kind of try to re-educate and show this person that, the scar is actually a very, very small part of his face. I think I even said, if we survey everyone in my office who are all, in the aesthetic field, so we all know how to look for these things, I'm sure none of them would have seen the scar as the reason why you're not able to find a significant other. And so it's my job to try to help steer them towards, perhaps it's not this, and maybe it's something else on the inside. Like maybe it's, the sense of insecurity that you have about how you look is kind of what's actually ending up like pushing people away. And so, what can you do to help that? Or another thing too is we get a lot of people, having trained with Dr. Nassif, I saw a lot of what we would call like the botched patients, right? So people who are coming for a revision because they had a first or a second or however many surgeries that went wrong. And then, they're really upset by what went on and they want to fix it or change it or whatever. And so a lot of our responsibility is telling them, like we can't turn back time, unfortunately, no matter how good of a surgeon you are. So we have to help them realize we can try to do our best to give you a better outcome. But at the end of the day, like it's on them themselves. They have to do the internal work of accepting that we can't go back. We can't turn back the clock. We can't, make you the way you were when you were born. It's just not possible. So how can you do your work so that way you can move forward successfully?
You chose this path because of something that happened earlier in your life, and it pushed you through all the tough times. Are you finding the satisfaction that drove you to this point and at this, early stage in your career that got you through all those tough nights? Are you finding the reward that helped you get here so far?
Yeah, I am. It's a little bit different because it isn't, like I said, it's not exactly what happened to me, but it's very similar. And I'm really glad I found a field that does focus on, like you said, some of that internal work combined with some of the external stuff, because that was a lot of what I felt my own illness experience was like. And so I am able to kind of speak to that. I'll say I do, of course, for every patient who's obsessing a little bit too much over something that they shouldn't be, we get 10 more patients who are just great candidates and they're so happy and thrilled afterward. And they're the ones who tell me, I could live on the way I look now, but I would love to just do a little something to make myself feel better. And those are the ones where we can do that little something. And then they feel, they honestly come in like a whole different person. I saw someone like that today and I was like, you look probably 20 years younger, but most importantly, you look like you had the best vacation the rest of your lifetime. And I'm so excited for you.
Those are perfect, aren't they?
Yeah.
So, most of our listeners are going to be physicians. And Dr. Wang, I'm curious because you brought something up before that I think resonates. You talked about developing soft skills. Mm-hmm. But yet in your field, you still have to be direct and set the proper expectations. Can you speak to that a little bit? How do you do it gently, but yet still set the proper expectation for a patient who's coming in, maybe asking for something that, as you just said, may or may not be realistic?
Yeah, so I'll caveat this here by saying I am by no means perfect at this yet. But what I try to do, and the people in my office who have seen me do consults have definitely expressed that they kind of find it refreshing, is that I truly do try to talk to them as if they were a really good friend or a family member or someone who I also cared about a lot. And when I can do it from that perspective, I feel like I can be very honest with them because I want them to know the truth, but also I can develop that relationship where they do truly feel like they can trust me. My favorite thing to hear from my patients is, and again, especially in the field of plastic surgery where there's a lot of make someone look, quote, better, and we don't really know what better means, right? So my favorite line from patients is they say after the consultation, they're like, you know what, Dr. Wang, I can tell that you understand me and my vision, and I just trust you to do whatever you have to do to give me what I'm looking for. And I love that because it means that we have somehow gotten to the point where we've had that dialogue where even I can say something like, that's not something I can fix. This is not something that can ever change. You will always be asymmetric, etc. And they appreciate that because they're like, thank you for telling me the truth. Thank you for being honest about limitations. And I want to move forward even regardless of these limitations. And I know that you are someone who's not going to lie. You're not someone who's going to promise me the moon and then, you can't deliver it. So I actually find being a little bit more upfront and honest has been a really good strategy for me.
The transparency you're talking about there about advocating for mental health and lowering that barrier to say, look, doctors go out and get help as well. Can you expand on that a little bit from the transparency that you share with, and maybe even normalizing let's call it therapy or seeking the mental health part of it?
Oh, yeah. These days, everyone jokes that, pretty much everyone is on some kind of antidepressant, which is definitely the case, including myself. But, as part of our medical intake, we always ask people what are their medications and what other medical conditions do they have. No one ever says that they actually have any other medical condition, but then when we get to their medication list, of course, they're on something. And so I always get there and I'm like, oh, what are you on this one for? And they're like, oh, a little bit of depression. I'm like, oh, cool, me too. And then, I kind of make it so like we're just friends and we're both on this medication together. And sometimes we'll even chime in about, oh yeah, I remember when I first started taking it, I experienced these side effects, and like, oh yeah, that happened to me too. And so I really try to make it so that way this might be kind of an awkward topic for them, but it's absolutely not awkward to talk about with me. I'm very open about it. I want them to feel comfortable talking about it with me too, because I do think it's important for this generation, older generations, new generations, to realize how important it is to get a little bit of help.
What's their general reaction when you share something like that? I've never been in a room where one of my doctors has said, "Hey, yeah, me too."
Yeah,
yeah. I think there's definitely some people are kind of like, oh, like a little bit surprised, but it does kind of warm them up to me, and that kind of goes back to the whole trust in our relationship. Is just like how they are offering and sharing something vulnerable with them, I'm also sharing something just as vulnerable back and saying, hey, it's okay that you are on something for a little bit of help. I'm on a couple of things for a little bit of help, and I see a therapist, and I think you should see therapy too. And, then we kind of can bond over that, but they see that I'm also a real person. I have my struggles too, just like how they do. And all we can do is try to get through it together.
One of the things that I've noticed with our physicians is they lean into having a pet as a part of their mental therapy. Is that something with it? Like Paul was joking in the beginning that your dog sitting there staring at you as we're talking. Is that something for you that you also resonate with?
Oh, absolutely. So growing up, I actually didn't really have any pets, and it was something that, I kind of always begged my parents for. And they're like, yeah, well, you'll play with them, but you're not going to actually, have the responsibility of taking care of them, which was probably true. But when I was actually in medical school, I was like, you know what, I'm finally independent and I'm going to go get my first pet. So I got a cat because I was like, I need to start easy. And she was kind of like the love and joy of my life. And you can imagine in something like medical school where there's a lot of new stuff and a lot of new stressors, and perhaps maybe was like the big fish in a small pond before, and now we're all kind of big fish swimming in the sea together. It was so great to just kind of have her to kind of cozy up and study with. I think people have said there's like studies that show when you pet an animal that your blood pressure actually comes down and your stress levels improve and all that stuff. And I totally believe that's true. Now I have this ginormous dog who is the love of my life. And I think he's helped me a lot. I would say, on the most absolute basic level, he forces me to go outside and take him on a walk. So there is always some form of physical activity, forcing me to go and enjoy some nature, forcing me to do, perhaps things that I would rather just kind of be a little bit too lazy and would rather stay at home for. But, because of him, I'm inspired to, explore different nature walks and hikes and things like that. And the latest thing, which is really, I've gone off the deep end, is I've been looking into recipes to make him for treats so he can be healthy. And then part of me doing that has involved me improving my own diet and nutrition and stuff. So,
You realize you're feeding your pet better than you're eating. You're like, that's where I've got to make some adjustments.
Hold on. Is that weird that I'm buying groceries and fresh produce for him? And maybe I should also buy some for myself. So, yeah.
Chris, you mentioned earlier soft skills. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Wang, this was a real cool thing that you brought up, because I don't think that this is talked about or taught as much. Brilliant.
Oh my God. I'm sorry, guys.
Great work.
I'm sorry.
Your dog does not want to talk about soft skills today.
No.
Your dog does not have soft skills.
He is
Those
all
are
about
real
intense. They're hard skills.
Those are hardcore dog skills.
We're leaving that in, Joe. We're going to keep the dog bark. Right. I love it. I love it, Dr. Wang. That is great.
Leave the dog in. Definitely. You know what? This is the reason I think it's funny. I'll let our producer edit out whatever she thinks is necessary. But this is life. We have these things that just interrupt stuff, and I think that's kind of what we're talking about is allowing to really normalize and have these interruptions in life and say, hey, it is messy, and it's not great. And guess what? I'm a part of that, just like everybody else. But coming back to the soft skills, hopefully he won't bark at me for asking this question again. The soft skills, the education, when we talked about you going out there and doing your fellowship, I think that's unique because there's not a lot of them that are doing fellowships through Dr. Nass's office. And it's a unique experience in itself. I think you cited that one of the biggest things you learned were those soft skills and being a business owner. Talk to that and what you learned, and what would you say to those who maybe didn't have that exposure or seeking to learn more about that as they're in training themselves still?
Yeah, so actually prior to my fellowship, all I had exposure to was kind of that hospital academic life. And so I was honestly very fearful of going into private practice because I didn't know what to expect. And there are a lot of skills that we do not get taught as physicians, and I didn't feel comfortable handling all of that. So I'm so thankful actually to my fellowship because I got to experience and see how several people in an office setting might handle certain business aspects that I had not gotten exposure to before. Some things that I saw were kind of handling hiring and firing, which is never a fun topic, but kind of what is the process? How do you do this in a way that, protects your business, but also isn't too retaliatory, I guess. I don't know if that's a word. So seeing that, how do you hire on the best talent and retain them? Things about networking, like how do you build a business in terms of expanding your influence? At the time, he was kind of, Dr. Nassif was really building up his skincare brand. And so I got to see and actually participate in a lot of the calls where he would be talking to the manufacturers, but then also then talking to the people who were marketing the products and kind of translating what he wanted in it. And then now having another meeting with the people who were selling it on QVC. And so it was really cool just kind of see the process of that in terms of like the creative flow and how you kind of make a product come to light to the customer. And there's also some finance stuff that I learned too. And that's kind of actually how I found my way to you. But, learning a little bit about some finances of business, and then also learning a lot about malpractice too. Dr. Nassif would help do the physician expert witness kind of advice type of thing for malpractice companies. And so he would kind of help us understand what are some of the nuances that we might not appreciate as young physicians. I think to this day, I have not read consents that are as intense as his, but it was actually really helpful going through that because I understand how he protects himself now. And it helps me too, because I want to be just as diligent about protecting myself. And these are things that, again, we aren't taught in medical school. I don't think we're really taught this in residency either. But I heard the other day that something like 98% of surgeons are going to get sued at some point, something really high and ridiculous. And so we all got to know how to protect ourselves. And I was so thankful that I got to have that kind of exposure. But I feel very bad for people who don't. And then something like this happens.
It is one of those things that comes up, right? The litigation for physicians, the fear. We were visiting with someone, and that was front of mind, right? That was something that was there. From a coaching aspect, how do you think the medical community, maybe we could add that back into training? It seems like it's something that's very important to physicians to be thinking about, especially as you mentioned, as surgeons. Where could we implement that back in to help out?
Well, I think with all kinds of things, it's always better to get them early. So I would say absolutely in medical school, I think we have to understand that there's a high likelihood that at some point in your career, you may get sued for something, whether it's right or not. It's just the country that we live in, and that's just the profession we're in. So this is going to happen. It happens to everyone. It happens even to, the professors who are teaching us. I think it would actually be helpful for more physicians to be frank, especially to younger physicians, about their own experiences going through the system, because then we can see that even the people that we idolize and respect have gone through the process, and it's going to happen to everyone, and it's normal to do so. And, you hear all these horror stories about doctors who commit suicide over a malpractice suit, and it's awful that these things are happening, but this is why we all have to talk about it in our community, because no one else is looking out for us. It's only the other doctors. So I think having other physicians being more frank about it and that's definitely a first step. And then beyond that would be, having some kind of, actually, I think it would be cool if we had some class or something at some point taught by perhaps a litigation or malpractice attorney, just to tell us what are the things that they are looking for, because we don't know that. And that way we can think about, well, how do we protect ourselves? Like I said, the consent process is just wild to me, the number of things that Dr. Nassif lays in his consents. I think some of it, I'm like, I don't know if I could carry that over to my own business, but he certainly has these things in place because he's trying to protect himself, and I understand that. And then one of the other things that they used to harp on a lot over there in Beverly Hills is documentation is huge. And that was something that I got a little bit of in residency, where people would say, like, make sure your notes are accurate and detailed and all that. But you could definitely see some people who took it a little bit less seriously. And I think especially when you're getting burnt out, you've got, like 30 clinic patients to see, you're already post-call. The last thing you want to be doing is writing more notes. But I mean, the notes are what they subpoena, and that's what they're working off of. And so it's so important for you to document well. My personal example, I have not gotten sued yet. I'm sure it's going to happen. But my actual example was in residency. Because in ENT, we participate in facial trauma call. And so I had gotten involved in a situation that ended up turning into a domestic spat, but I was involved in some like suturing, repair for someone. And I had a feeling that things were not as rosy as they appeared. So I took a lot of photos, much more than I normally would have. I put them all in the chart. I wrote very detailed description of my exam findings, my procedure, documenting what were the risks of this and all that. And sure enough, I think 3 or 4 years later, I got a summons because the person was suing the other person over damages related to this. And, those lawyers actually told me, they're like, your note was fantastic because we had all the evidence right there. And also, it's not something where we're worried about what you did because you clearly documented everything. We can see how bad it was. It wasn't your fault kind of thing. So I actually felt really protected because I kind of took that extra step, even though I know it's hard to do so when you're kind of burnt out. So even to this day, I write very long notes, especially if I know that there's a difficult interaction that happened, like a patient's unhappy about something. I try to be as detailed as possible, and we can just hope for the best.
Thinking about all these notes and how they are necessary items to protect you. We had a conversation not too long ago with somebody about how AI would impact medicine. And I'm just wondering where this element could come in and actually help, instead of being, downtrodden with so much extra work to do the notes, because it's one thing to, and I don't think the general population realizes you do your work, you come in, you see the patients, and then I know several people that come home and then they're working on notes and continuing to work into the late evening hours, just to make sure that this stuff is documented. And so I wonder if AI can be helpful in this way. But I also wonder, sometimes there's always these double-edged swords, like, well, if it comes in and helps in a certain way, maybe there's too much documentation. Are you not able to have conversations with a patient that are just more frank than whether or not that session was recorded? Does that make sense? I guess what I'm trying to go with that, to try to be clear, is that sometimes we hold our tongue. We don't say, because now it's like, well, everything's being recorded, and that helps me because my notes are there and clear and everybody knows what happened. But now everything's recorded, so I have to watch everything, and I can't really just treat the patient. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So first, I would say, like, it is ridiculous how our documentation in the medical field has become so absurd. You are right. I actually today, I still have maybe 2 or 3 notes for people that I have to write now, but I raced home because I was like, I got to do this call. So, but I have notes myself I have to do. I think the way that AI can kind of help maybe a little bit to streamline the process is there are a lot of things we go through in every single patient encounter that is for the most part the same, or even not necessarily every single encounter, but for example, every time I talk to a new patient about a rhinoplasty or nose job, as people call it, I try to bring up the exact same, recovery process, the risks, where the incisions are located, blah, blah, blah. And those are the parts where I could easily see that, just pop it into an AI, chat GPT type of thing and have them kind of generate like a basic skeleton framework of, okay, this was discussed, these things. And then you add to it the specifics to that patient. So that way it is still relevant and pertinent to that exact encounter. So you can say, like, this patient in particular was very concerned about these features. And so this is what I plan to do for this patient, insert XYZ. And then that way, at least a majority of the stuff is getting taken care of by AI or a machine, but you're still able to customize it a little bit. And then same with the whole making sure that you are really heart to heart having that patient connection is really, really important. And that way, I think no matter at what point computers come into the picture, they understand that there's still a human element behind it all.
You know what I want to come back to? We started down this path of your personal mental health advocacy. There's really two avenues that you can go with this. And that's one, the mental health advocacy for the patients that you see, because they're in there. We talked about that, seeking potentially a outer appearance change when they really need to focus on the inward. But there's also this other advocacy that I think you have and are out there trying to help other physicians. So can you speak to that? And what do you do? How do you help your peers to be more open? I don't know how other people will hear that, and will it make them afraid or anxious or, hey, I would never disclose to a patient that I was also on an antidepressant. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe hearing what you said, I think, could be refreshing to people.
Yeah, so it's funny because like in the mental health space and actually in psychiatry, they teach us the first stage is this pre-meditation stage. So it's kind of like the stage before you even realize that there's something wrong. And a lot of people are kind of, hanging out in that stage. So those people are always harder to get to because they think that their lives are hunky-dory and they don't need to make any changes. But I think a lot of people are starting to realize more and more that things are not perfect in the practice of medicine, and that this is why burnout rates are so high. So again, for me, the best I can do is I'm trying to lead by example. I am extremely open about my mental health things, and everyone in my office knows, and I'm always they all joke, but I'm essentially the therapist of the office in the sense that I therapize the patients and other office mates. But it's honestly because I just think it's so important to do, and I hope that people. I know for a fact that some of the younger office staff have said to me, "Wow, it's so great to see someone who's successful like you who does admit to needing a little bit of extra help." And I'm like, yeah, of course, we all need a little bit of help. And again, just trying to make it seem like it's not this big deal. Just go do it.
Well, I think it's refreshing. And I have said actually on previous podcasts that I am currently in therapy. I have taken antidepressants. I have struggled off and on with long-term depression. And I just think that that's the odd thing is that people can look from the outside in. It doesn't really matter what walk of life. We just have that. We want to look at people, and that outside appearance is so much easier to say, oh, they got it all figured out. And so I applaud you for doing that. I do think that the younger generation talks about it more.
Oh,
I have a
absolutely.
15-year-old daughter, and she says, oh, yeah, it's totally normal. Kids in my school talk about therapy like it's nothing. And I hope that it continues, right? And I hope that leadership from you and from the younger generation can show people really in my generation, not to date me or Chris, although technically, Chris, you admitted I am your elder.
You are older. You are older.
Right. So
Yeah.
seek the
It's
wisdom.
one of my
outside of
skills,
yourself.
Dr. Wang, is to be able to talk up and down generations. And that's why Paul
That's
and I
right.
get along so well.
Oh, yes.
That's
You're
right.
like
Yeah,
the.
It's one of my soft skills.
Oh,
Yeah.
there you
It's
go.
my soft skill. Yeah.
that's right. Respect, right? But I'm learning from them, and one of the things I've also started to do is take them to therapy. So I have 2 girls, and they're in their teenage years, and I take them to therapy with me. Why? It's not because things are so bad. It's because I want to open that line of communication and have that guidance and have the ability to just put down phones and close the rest of the world off and just say, hey, where are you at? And if we did that on our own, then maybe therapy wouldn't be necessary, but it is, and we don't. So
Yeah.
thank you for your leadership in that,
Yeah, I actually, I'm going to use the word because I dragged my mom into doing family therapy because it was very important to me it was important to both of us to kind of work on our relationship. And I told her, well, I want to do this with a therapist. And she kind of was, of the older generation and was like, therapy is for people who are crazy. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's not for that. And only literally, I think after a couple of sessions, she was like, wow, this is great. And I could tell that in our joint sessions, she had a lot to say. And I was like, this is why you need your own therapist as well. So that way you can dump all this out. But there's one podcast that I listen to. I listen to a lot of mental health podcasts, but there's one that I listen to where they say everyone should have a therapist because everyone just needs to have some kind of unbiased participant in their lives who you can just kind of dump on and then move on from it.
Yeah. I just recently went, and my 15-year-old, we were walking out of there, and I don't know, I'm in my late 40s, and we'll just leave it at that. I might be turning that corner soon, but that every parent's fear, and I know we're really kind of moving away from medicine, but I'm sure there's a lot of physicians out there that have kids, and so probably your mom's fear is same as mine. Am I talking to my kids the way that they want to be talked to? Am I understanding what they're saying? They're dropping new language just like we did when we were kids, and our parents looked at us like, "What the hell did you just say?" And so, we walked out of this session the other day, and she says, first thing out of her mouth was, "That was really productive."
Wow.
And I felt like, oh my God, she might actually admit to being my daughter in public, right? I mean, this is a step in the right direction. But no, I loved it. So, thank you for doing that. And I hope that people listening, that your peers can have the courage to follow suit and grow from that. As we think about all the things that you've shared, and I love your story. I love that you took your life experience and you just let it lead you to a completely different path, even though you were, it sounded like, on your way to becoming president of the United States, frankly.
If only.
Yeah. We may put your name in there. We may just throw your name in there.
Yeah, you were the poster child for future president of the United States. So I'm not saying you can't. You could probably still choose that path. But one of the things I am curious about, we specifically named this podcast The Patient Physician. And when you think about that title, when you think about that name and everything that you've been through, and you're looking ahead in your career, tell me what you think that phrase, the patient physician, what does that mean to you?
So that's actually a really good question because when you first introduced it to me, I was like, wow, that's a great title because it can mean so many things. There's patient as in like a patient-doctor relationship. And, for that, I would say, yeah, I've played the role of both, but also every doctor is probably going to play the role of a patient at some point in their lifetime. We're all going to have some kind of malady at some point in our lives, So just kind of realizing that you can be both sides of the bed. But then patient in terms of being patient, and that can be being patient with yourself, being patient with others, being patient with life. I think a lot of that does kind of weigh into this whole mental health thing. Like, I would say again, all my friends and family will say, when I was younger, I was very much kind of like the rabbit and the turtle story, where I was kind of always rushing to get to the next step. And things like my illness kind of forced me to stay back a little bit and kind of smell the roses a little bit, have a little bit more patience. Going through therapy has really helped me realize that, maybe I am not a bajillionaire right now, but if I wait and do the right things, then good things will happen to me. And it doesn't have to happen tomorrow. It could happen in 5 years. It can happen in 10 years. But I have to hope that putting in the time and the effort will manifest into something. And so that's also, our freaking medical training is so long, but you just have to realize that at the end of the journey, there's something that's really, really rewarding.
Well, I can't predict the future, but you are an amazing individual, and good things are going to happen to you. I think you're doing a lot of wonderful things, and we appreciate your leadership out there. I want to thank you again for your time. I know you've got notes to get to and a dog to walk, and way more important things than this. But thank you so much for your time. Your
thank you for having me.
And sharing.
Thank you for having me. Like I said, this was so great. I'll just throw in our quick little story here is that I found you because I was trying to find and sort out my finances and insurance things. And again, this is another area where they don't teach us this in school and then throw us into the forest hoping that we can make a living on our own. And we're very thankful for people like you out there who can help guide us along the way.
Well, thank you, Dr. Wang. It is amazing to me, the leadership that you're showing. When you think of your specialty, you think external things with people, and you have such a heart towards healing the internal part of people as well. And I just think you're going to impact so many people's lives in a positive way. And thanks for sharing some time with us.
Thank you so much, guys. Maybe I will run for presidency.
After you get done fixing the natural dog food, solving the natural dog food dilemma in the United States.
See, somebody's hungry right there.
Somebody's hungry.
Feed that dog attention and food right now.
That's right. He's like, feed me and then get to your notes, Mom. Let's go.
No, he doesn't care about my notes.
Well, let us know where we need to cast and when we need to cast our ballot.
Yeah.
Don't be surprised if you see some just write-ins. Paul and I are going to start
That's my
start your own.
beginning. We got to make sure that this gets edited so that way if I do run in the future, they don't find any dirt on me.
You're like, it's a violation of your HIPAA. You can't control it. You can't control if there's a natural groundswell for your leadership.
Yeah.
This conversation was brought to you by Physicians Resource Services, a firm supporting medical professionals to improve their financial situation and pursue their personal and professional goals. The Patient Physician is produced in Austin, Texas. Editing and sound design are in the hands of the PodConnects Podcast Network. Please email questions or show ideas to info@physiciansrs.com.